Okay, we'll call this meeting of the Public Works Infrastructure Committee together. I'd ask the other committee members to introduce themselves, starting with Councilman Emerson.
Hi, Tony Emerson, representing District 4. Mike, you're muted.
Here we go. Mike Padilla representing District 5.
Thank you. Neil Dobler representing District 7. Looks like we also have Councilman on. I do not see Councilman Lesser yet, but I'm assuming he will join momentarily.
I'm here.
Oh, sorry. You want to introduce yourself, Councilman?
Yeah, Councilman Mike Lesser, District 9.
Thank you. All right. We have a pretty full agenda. I know we also have some people that have asked to make comments. We also have some comments from some questions from Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala. We're going to reserve those, I think, for towards the end of the meeting. So we'll try to get through the published agenda as quickly as we can. Let's, and I might note that this is the last meeting of really our kind of our 2020 cycle. The deputy mayor will be making appointments to the new committees here shortly, I assume, and we will go ahead and set the next meeting at the end of this one, but that will be with the new committee, whoever that ends up being. All right, we have in front of you the minutes from the December 21st, 2020 meeting. Would accept a motion for approval.
Move approval.
All right, we have a motion by Councilman Emerson, a second by Councilman Padilla. All those in favor say aye or raise your hand. Aye. Motion passes. Our next item of business is an update of the fleet replacement program. And I would ask any of you that are making presentations, if you have a presentation, I know we had a number of them attached to the agenda, if you would go ahead and present that to the group. So fleet replacement program, Hannah.
Yes, sir. So the fleet replacement program is, this is going to be a very large PDF. It's truly meant as kind of an update for this body to review, provide feedback on where we're going, and get some insight into some of our next steps. So the document I'm going to present is very lengthy. It is a combination of last month's update, as well as some additional information based on the progress we've made this month. So please ask lots of questions. There's lots of numbers and words. And for the sake of time, I'll try to touch on the high points and not read all of it. So let me pull it up. Okay. Can you all see my screen? Great.
Yes.
So to update the committee since the January 26th meeting regarding the potential fleet replacement program, excuse me. So first we're going to go over some of the requested information from our November meeting. So the request was to look at some of our existing fleet assets in the context of the model referenced in the Mercury fleet replacement report that we discussed. So in doing so, we selected 2 assets at random from our current fleet to give as an example. So the first one we shared was a 2013 Ford Explorer with the police department. So this was purchased for $26,000. So far, it's had $12,000 in repair and maintenance cost, and the current miles is 87,000, just under 88. So in the graph, what we have with a number of the lines, We show the operating costs, so our repairs and maintenance in blue, and you can see how that does grow over time. One second. So you can see how it grows over time and exponentially starts to hit a point here in about year 6, year 5, where you see that curve sharpen. The capital value is the orange line, and it decreases over time as depreciation sets in. The sum of the total is essentially our total cost of ownership. If we count depreciation as part of the value of which the asset is, as well as our repairs and expenses, to give us that viewpoint at which point it starts to have a diminishing return. The red line right here is based on the Mercury Report recommendation for that type of vehicle. So per the Mercury Report, it's suggested at 48 months for a PD cruiser to be replaced. This is based off the anticipation that it's used the entirety of its life for that purpose. Based on our actual data, the lowest point of ownership occurs in year 6. This is largely due to the practice that PD has taken where they rotate vehicles out of patrol. So once it hits a certain threshold, either in terms of miles or years, they rotate it to one of their supplemental departments. And you can see that in the miles, that is the green dotted line, how you had a stark increase in year 1 and 2, and then it dramatically flattens out. So that's when they've rotated it out of their field ops and are using it for different services. Any questions on the graph?
Yeah, hey, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Thank you. Hannah, I guess I have a question. It starts at year 1 with already 12,000 miles on it. I guess, can you explain that?
That's during year 1, we put 12,000 miles on it. So we bought it new, but that first year is 12,000, and it was acquired, I believe, in July for this one. I could be misremembering, so it wasn't a full year, it was a partial year.
Okay, so the acquisition would actually be over there on the, I guess, on the vertical axis then. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Any other questions? The next example that we pulled was a 2007 Ford F-150 with the street department. It was purchased for $15,000. We've spent $17,000 on it since we've owned it, and currently it's sitting at 93,000 miles. All of the lines and data points are the same on this one. You can see that the total cost of ownership at the lowest point was during our year 8. And this is actually earlier than the Mercury recommendation on a standard cycle that would put it at the 10-year, 110,000 mile threshold. So we have 2 examples, and they were picked purely at random for our assets over 7 years old. So we have enough data to showcase. And you can see in both examples that they don't always meet the standard cycle or standard. It really just kind of helps illustrate, the need to have a fleet manager that's really analyzing this, regardless of what method we choose to go for a fleet replacement, but making sure we tailor it to our own specific assets and how they're utilized. Any questions on this one? Okay. So the next request that we had specific from this committee was in December. We were asked about the composite of our fleet. So what kind of vehicles make up our total fleet, and looking at trucks, vans, sedans, SUVs, comparatively to our total, essentially light duty, if you will, fleet at 328 assets. And keep in mind, again, with a lot of these points, they're a point in time. Our assets within fleet change regularly, so it may be slightly off here and there. You can see I broke it out in non-PD, as they have some special uses, PD and PD patrol. and then what percent of total it makes up. So the question specifically was how much of our fleet is comprised of sedans. Currently, we're looking at 88 sedans in total, or 27% of our light duty fleet. There is a large number of sedans within PD. There are 53. Most of these are vehicles that we've had in our fleet for quite some time, so they've been repurposed over the years. And we do have some sedans that are designated as patrol, which is primarily their leadership and management staff, as our patrol, true patrol division uses SUVs. As part of our analysis since this last month, Brian, our fleet manager, has spoken with a lot of the divisions across the city, and they talked a lot about how they utilize their fleet and the different vehicles that are in it. Based on his conversation, a number of them, if not the vast majority, don't necessarily have a specific need for a sedan. The infusion of sedans within our fleet has really been driven by the lower cost of purchase and limited budgets. So it hasn't been made on the basis of turning over the vehicle and selling it at the peak point. It's really been about the cost of entry. So getting into some of the updates as to where we are within this process, I have it broken out into a few different buckets. So from the financial analysis standpoint, we're still working to identify that comprehensive list of vehicles. So we have, as I mentioned, Brian has worked at different departments to identify out of their fleet what type of vehicle is necessary. We have received a list from PD that showcases their vehicles by essentially equipment classification. So do they need to be fully equipped, have some specialty, or can they be more off the street type of vehicles? Enterprise has provided us a list of a couple of extra assets, and they've received a list of all of ours as part of their modeling process. I will review later a couple of the costing sheets similar to I showed last month that will have a Ford F-150 as well as an SUV. And I will also show an additional model that has more or the cost of purchase that we have worked with our financial advisors to put together. From a contract analysis standpoint, we reviewed that Sourcewell is in fact a valid contract that we can piggyback off of if so choose to. Our legal department has worked through a lot of the contracts and the master agreements and is working with Enterprise to go back and forth and see where some of the concern points are and how we can work through those. This is inclusive of items such as insurance requirements as well. So going back to some of the examples from the December Public Works Infrastructure meeting, to better understand the model, Enterprise sent us a couple costing sheets. At the time, we hadn't received an F-150 as an example, so we were using our base contract that we could get off of the state, which was at about a 27% discount. Enterprise's model is built off of the principle of optimizing the cost of ownership closely tied to the resale of the vehicle. So they're not necessarily hitting that point of diminishing returns in the sense of repairs and maintenance costs. It's more about at what point is it optimal to sell it to get the greatest return on your investment, which is why there's a number of them that show a 60-month term, but then a lot of the vehicles that have the higher resale actually are in a 12-month term. So a much more condensed cycle. So a couple of the key metrics when we're looking at the financial analysis, obviously the purchase cost, which is the capitalized cost after all rebates and incentives, plus a delivery fee, our manufacturer suggested retail, plus a destination charge, since they do order straight off the line, a management fee, which is 0.10% of the invoice price before rebates. The interest is charged off of a 3-year treasury note plus 350 basis points. And then the final one is the estimated resale value, which is based on Enterprise's projection of the used car market. So solely relying on their assumptions. To give an idea of why this is so cost advantageous at this particular point in time, we are, as we know, at an all-time low in terms of interest rates. So with a 3-year treasury rate, I've included a couple graphs just to kind of help set the baseline as to the historical norms. So you can see in the December beginning of month, which is when I first ran this, looking back to 2016, that was at a 1.45% compared to 2020 at a 0.22. So we do know that we're seeing incredibly low cost of borrowing, but as kind of shown here on this graph, that does ebb and flow, and it is a daily rate. So using those components in mind, here's the first 2 examples that we had presented on last month that we received from Enterprise. One was a Chevy Malibu, so a sedan, and then a GMC Sierra for the truck. So based on a 60-month term for the sedan, which is their recommended terms, we would look at essentially our monthly payments of $303 for an annual cost of $3,600, and over the course of 60 months, $18,000. This is against a purchase price of almost $19,000, which is highly dependent on Enterprise's ability to seek out rebates based on volume and some of their other clients and leverage that. At the end of term, the balance on the principal would be $4,700. And the lease termination fee is another $400. So regardless of whether or not we sell the vehicle back and buy a new one, or if we say we want to keep that vehicle at the end of the 60 months, we would still owe Enterprise just over $5,000. They're estimating the resale value at $13,500. And so we would end up getting essentially the cash less our fees, our balance and our fee would be $8,300. So over the total term, we would have paid out $18,000. So our net cost would have been $9,000. So we do not make money on an Enterprise for a sedan. It will end up costing us almost $10,000 over the course of the 5-year period. Part of that isn't necessarily realized costs. As with the leasing model, the cash from resale, the $83,000, any value that we get in that moment, while not net positive over the 60 months, would be reinvested into purchasing a new vehicle. The Sierra is a different story. So with the Sierra and the current used car market being what it is and in very high demands, in particular for trucks and large SUVs, they recommended a 12-month lease. So this is much more condensed than the 60-month that they're recommending for the sedan. With the 12-month lease, we're still looking at a payment that it's tiered up, as is the value of the car. So $450 a month for an annual expense of $5,300. Since it's only 1 year, the annual and the term total are equal. At the end, we'll still owe $21,000 on the vehicle and then have the same lease termination fee of $395. The difference here is that based on Enterprise's used sell projection in their market, they project that they could get $28,500 upon resale of this truck, which with the cash and then the net over time would actually net us realizing $1,700 in revenue. So the key piece on this, it is really good. And the county has expressed that they have been able to realize this play out this last year. And so it is something that is very much a real number, but it is subject to change as the interest rates and used car markets do fluctuate frequently. So we now have 2 additional vehicles that we were able to compile and put into this to kind of give a little bit more summary of what typically we would purchase. A lot of our cars are Ford F-150s, and the Traverse gives us an example of what an SUV could potentially be. So with the F-150, they're recommending, again, a 12-month lease. A lot of these are very similar and the same. The difference is they actually estimate a slightly higher resale at $29,500. To get us a net cost of $2,700 at the end of it. So still a very positive story, but a lot of it's based off of any of the rebates that we can get and then how much they can resell it after 1 year. The Traverse, so an SUV, not quite as strong in terms of resale and holding its value, but still very positive. So a 12-month term, netting out to essentially neutral at the end of the term based on a resale value of $29,000. Any questions on any of these models? Councilmember T?
One question, Hannah, is there any mileage limitation on any of these leases?
There is not a limitation, but they do estimate, I believe it's about 6,000 miles, between 6 and 7,500, I have to go look, to give us the estimate of the cost of resale. So the only direct cost would be at the end of it if we've got less for it because the mileage is higher, but there's no penalty or additional fees.
Okay, thank you.
And Chair, if I could ask, please.
You bet.
Yeah, so Hannah, am I correct? This is just a one-time, this might be just a one-time opportunity because the markets will correct eventually. I mean, when things change, because they don't guarantee any of these resale values, correct? If a lot of people start doing this and then so a lot of things come off lease here in 12 months and the market's flooded, it can go down to 25 and this can be a cost. Is that correct?
That is correct. There's no guaranteed resale. At the end of the term, it is what it is in terms of your interest rates and or resale value, whichever way you choose. If we were to get to the end of 1 year and it was not a positive resale experience, Enterprise does have the ability to extend out our lease and we can negotiate in a new lease term. That would require us to essentially lock in a new rate. So we wouldn't be able to hold the same interest rate, but we would be able to extend that lease period over time. That's one of the values that Enterprise sells as part of their package, and part of the incentive is that they manage that lease program for you, meaning they will adjust their terms and what they're recommending based on current market trends. So if they see that trend start to turn, the next truck they recommend that we purchase or the next one we go after, maybe it's a 36-month instead of a 12. So they do vary it. It's more than just the two options, but given the current markets, that's what they're recommending.
So we don't have the automatic option to go ahead and extend at that point. My company leases some things through, it used to be GE Finance. And after 12 months, we could buy it or we could turn it back in. But then if not, it was like a 60-month, but we had the option after 1 year to turn it back in. Is that not the way it works? We have to sign a 12-month with them?
We have to define the lease period. And the lease period at that point essentially calculates the interest. So with the way that they do interest, it's not a standard interest accumulation. I believe it's the rule of 78, I think.
Yeah, that's on the thing. I saw that.
Yeah, so they do a lot more upfront interest. And so while we could break it early, we'd still be liable for a large chunk of that interest based on how they do their math. So at the end of 1 year, odds are it'd still be more cost prohibitive. I haven't done the numbers to extend it out and create a new lease based on current interest rates versus trying to break it and pay the extra interest.
Okay, thank you.
Looks like we have a question from Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you, Chair. So on the resale, do they resell it or do we resell it?
They resell it. So that's another one of their benefits. When we get down into the cost of funding, you'll see that if in our proposal or in our models where we resell it, I actually drop the value 5%. Based on Enterprise's wide resale network. I would imagine they're going to be able to get a lot more for that asset than we are on our traditional govdeals.com.
Okay. And then let's see, Neil asked about the mileage. Who does the major or minor repairs? Why we're in contract with them?
We would still do that. So Enterprise has the option of getting their maintenance package, which is a flat fee for all anticipated repairs, meaning they're not going to cover tires, windshield wipers, those sort of things that are anticipated, but they would cover all major repairs and inclusive of some preventive maintenance items. Because we have our own internal fleet shop that can do that same service at a fraction of the cost, we would not look to engage with that agreement with Enterprise.
So we would do our own oil changes and maintenance like that.
Yes.
Now, Hannah, and if I may, Mr. Chair, I have one more question. I apologize. You know, I've been on the board a while, and I remember them saying we shouldn't lease anymore, we should buy. Now we're back to we should lease. And one of the reasons that they gave was because they said the technology of the mechanics, it was just changing the dynamics, and the older mechanics didn't know the up-to-dated. Are we still struggling with that? Or do you know?
No, we're not. So we do put in a large emphasis, and Brian can speak to it more if you have additional specific or questions, but we do put a large emphasis on training. So we do have ASE certified technicians across all of our shops. In fact, a lot of them are even emergency response vehicle certified as well. So we put a lot of emphasis on maintaining that knowledge. As things have gotten more computerized, there's definitely guys that have their specialty, but we have the ability in-house to service all of it. Where we start to run into some gaps is when we start to get into some of the hybrid and electric components. None of our guys are trained on electric because we don't have any at this point. In hybrid, we do have a couple hybrids in our fleet that we do service internally, but there's definitely differences and nuances. So as technology evolves that direction, as will our training for our technicians.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You bet. Any other questions?
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
That. If we're going to do that, then would we be able to charge for warranty work that has to be done on the vehicles?
I believe so. I'd have to look, but we should be able to still charge back warranty work as we do today.
Other questions? Seeing none, go ahead, Hannah.
So the next section is really the cost of funding. So as we've talked through, we've gone really over the price of leasing. What are the lease options that we are getting? But working with our financial advisors, we've come up with a comparison just to showcase on an individual vehicle what each of the different funding mechanisms would look like. And the funding mechanisms we're going to talk about are the leasing options. So it'll be a recap of what we just went over. Cash-based funding, which will include an opportunity cost, while small, still there today, as well as bond funding. Knowing we're a municipality, bond funds is how we would essentially take out debt. We explored that option just to showcase out the different costing elements. So the assumptions we used, because to kind of compare and try to get close, we did have to make a few. We estimated our internal purchase price of the GMC Sierra and Chevy models at 25% off the MSRP. We'd actually have to go out to bid for that. So we don't currently have a contract that would guarantee us that sort of a discount. We'd actually have to go and secure a new one. The purchase price of the F-150 is estimated at a 27% discount, which is more in line with the state contract today. We'd have to go and price out some of the specifics in terms of add-ons and equipment, but we use it as a baseline comparison. The resale and bond cash options are assumed, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, with a 5% less return. And that's based on my assumption that we aren't going to demand the same resale value as Enterprise would. We don't have the same used car network that has access for us, and that's kind of what they do. That's not necessarily what we do, it's just a supplemental side. The cash investment rate is estimated, so our opportunity cost at 0.25% over a 5-year period. And then our bond terms mirror our lease terms from Enterprise. So trying to stay with that 12-month and 60-month cycles just to kind of do a little bit more of an apples to apples comparison. So on this very much eye chart, kind of going through and walking through each of the sections. So the first, we have the Chevy Malibu. It's at a 60-month term. And then you see the 3 different funding options below. The first one being the lease through enterprise. So you see a lot of the same metrics in terms of our purchase price, what's our principal that we're putting down, our interest and fees, and then the resale value that we're estimating, the book value, which is Enterprise's way of saying what we owe at the end of our term, our net cost, and then our average annual cost. So for the Malibu, our net cost, as we talked before, was $9,800 for an average annual cost of $3,600. If we were to go with bond funding, meaning we still took out money, we still had interest, the difference would be we would have a much higher principal when we went to it because we wouldn't get some of the same incentives and discounts necessarily. So our principal matches our purchase price. Our interest and fees would be an accumulative of $500 versus $4,500. Our interest rates are much lower than what Enterprise would be passing on to us, plus there's no management fee. So we'd manage all of our fleet maintenance and the replacement cycles in-house. Our resale, I decreased by 5%, being realistic with not access to the same network, which would take our net cost from 98 down to 58. So there is a sizable difference over a 5-year period. Cash bonding or cash purchase is the third one. So this is the one that was included and is included in the CIP for conversation out of cash. So this would require either a large influx or it would require a greater amount of operational costs dedicated to this source. And quite honestly, a combination of both if we're going to do a citywide program. But with cash purchase, our purchase price and principal, it's kind of the same thing. It's what we got it for. There's no interest in fees, but there is a slight opportunity cost. So this is with the assumption that if we didn't spend this money on this asset, we would have the opportunity to invest that money and have a return on it. So the opportunity cost for this is estimated at $226. Resale is the same as our bond leasing. We would sell it internally and manage that. So our net cost would come down to $5,500. Any questions on that, Matt, before we get into the other examples? So the next 3 we see down here, the Sierra, the Traverse, and the F-150 are very similar in nature. You can see really the biggest eye-opening, at least for me, is in the interest and fees section, because this will aggregate up how much of that are we really going to pay above just a cash purchase. And then coming out to the net cost when we get to the end, for Sierra, we would show that $1,700 return. If we GeoBond funded it because of the decrease in our resale and an anticipated increase in what we'd be able to get that vehicle for, both of which are very much a shot in the dark, to be quite honest. We haven't gone out to bid for Sierra, so there is a strong likelihood we could get below the $27,000 of purchase price, but would rather not overcommit in terms of that and show an artificially greater return.
Mr. Chair. I didn't.
Yes, Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Chair. Hannah, I guess I'm confused because you're showing negative net cost, which on the, negative cost is actually an income. But I don't think that's correct, right? You're actually saying the Chevy Malibu cost us, it should be a positive net cost, correct?
Correct.
They're backwards. So really the things in parentheses should not have parentheses on them, and the things that don't have parentheses should have parentheses on them, correct?
Yes, way of showing it, yes.
Okay, thanks. That's what was really, I couldn't figure out what was going on. I guess also if you could look at the F-150, like on the lease, the numbers don't quite match up, and I just wonder what the difference is. Is this maybe a real life example versus up above was not? They're just off by a few hundred here and there. I mean, each thing's off by a little bit on the F-150, for instance, from the previous page.
I will have to go back and look. They were calculated through different models, so there could be something in there. I will double check. Can't tell you off the top of my head, but I will follow up. They should be slightly different. The initial model up here on the F-150 was based on our original calculation. I'd have to go back and double check 25, 29 to make sure that something in the new model wasn't looking at it differently, but I will go back and do that.
Thank you.
So going through those, it definitely shows, a wide range of options. Obviously, with the exception of the nuances of the Sierra and the F-150, which we would want to finesse a little bit more. The cash purchasing option is the best in terms of a financial return. A lot of that is driven off of the fact that we can borrow at a very low cost, so our interest and fees are minimal. It also would rely internally for our staff to manage the program and manage the lifespan of that vehicle, which is not included in these calculations, whereas with Enterprise, they do have an additional management fee that they do charge us. Another key thing to note is that while we showed the geo bonding funding example, currently, this would not be within our debt policy to be able to execute on this. Our debt policy has assets over 125,000 and 10-year of life. Doing individual vehicles, while would be allowed within the state guidelines, is not something that as a city we have approval for. We would have to modify if we then chose to go that direction. But we wanted to definitely show it to give you the idea of how much the leasing option would really cost us versus other options that we could potentially use.
I've got a question, Hannah. I think Jessica or Steve can probably answer this. Can we even bond? I mean, it's not really a debt policy, is it? It's the ability to actually sell bonds for something that doesn't really meet the bonding criteria.
That's a great question. It's considered an operating expense. So I'll get back to you in terms of state law and whether it actually allows it, but because it's an operating expense, that would be, I think, the concern.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions before we kind of go on to what our next steps are and kind of wrap it up a little bit?
I'd say move ahead if you could.
Okay, so just kind of in summary and key takeaways, because there's a lot of information. We're currently working with a number of the impacted departments to see what we could do and make sure that we target the right approach to the right asset. As we showed with our real life examples, effective fleet management program cannot be a one size approach. We can't just kind of set it, forget it, and let it go. That's quite honestly how we've gotten to our current fleet, where we don't have a lot of the proactive nature and replacement cycles and managing the assets in that mindset. We have a wide range of assets that are used in a wide range of different functions, with many requiring additional outfitting that may not meet the criteria for an enterprise lease program or lease program of any sort. We still have considerations to make in terms of contractual and risk perspective for the city that need to be evaluated to determine that we don't enter into an agreement that is not in the best interest of the city. So we're still working through a lot of those components. Legal's done a fantastic job trying to dive in and work with them. There's a lot of pieces there. So we're still taking all the information that we've gathered, as well as any feedback from this body, and we'll work with coming up with our recommendation on a more aggregate level. So we've, at this point, kind of focused on individual assets, trying to understand the financing components for the one, so that we can articulate and clearly roll up the fleet in totality and understand the impact, which quite frankly will also show us the cost of exit risk that we've talked about in our first update on a more grander scale. So that $5,000 for the one vehicle to buy out at the end of term seems nominal. You take that $5,000 and you multiply it across 300 different assets, that adds up really quick. So we'll be able to showcase the larger picture and then determine which assets kind of fall into which buckets.
All right, very, very good presentation. A lot to think about. Any questions before Hannah's done here? All right, seeing none, I think just in interest of time, we're 45 minutes into our 2-hour allotment, and we've still got a lot on the table here. I'm going to move up, or suggest that we move up item 5, which is the CIP process. Since we're heading into CIP discussion pretty quickly here, let's move that up and talk about it and then see where we are for time. Hannah, I assume you were going to do facilities. Let's just see where we are on time. We may need to move that to the next discussion just so we can get everything in. Before we start the CIP, I had a good discussion with Jessica and Steve Wade about the CIP process, and I know Jessica is going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like as it unfolds over the next year. Just wanted to point out that, you know, this committee started based on the CIP action taken at the end of last year that directed certain projects to the City Council for approval. So just to kind of put into context where we're at, according to that piece of legislation, we look specifically at facilities, sidewalks, fleet, those type of things, as well as projects that fall under the half-cent sales tax. I think this committee's evolved a little bit into a good place for education, discussion, some of the things that, like we just went through with fleet, good opportunity to get input and really to get good understanding prior to these things coming in front of the full council. So we'll certainly continue along those lines, but just wanted to point out that we have some specific areas where the council will get a recommendation from this committee. And again, that's on certain projects. Jessica, I am going to turn it over to you at this point. And I think you were going to not only walk us through the CIP discussion, but also talk about what the calendar kind of looks like for the upcoming year. So Jessica.
Thank you, Councilman. And as a point of clarification from Hannah's piece, we would not be able to use the debt service fund for leases, but we could revisit the state law in terms of using bonds for a lease. But in that respect, you would kind of be paying 2 interest rates, bonds, and then also your lease agreement. So just as a point of clarification. In terms of the CIP, I'll talk briefly about the timeline for the year and what the CIP team could, the feedback we would like to receive today on the summary list that you've all received. And then I'll turn it over to Steve to go through the actual project list. So high level, what we'd really like today is to talk about the asset allocation in terms of how much money is currently being modeled going towards streets versus facilities versus neighborhood relations. So really thinking as a committee, is this how you would like the different funding to be used in terms of the buckets? And the reason I say that's part of the discussion we're really wanting feedback on today is that the way that we could use the committee over the year to focus on the CIP is, you know, from now until mid-year, we're working through the 2022 CIP, what projects we see on the horizon, is that the right way forward, being fairly high level in terms of just looking at the asset allocation. And then as you get to July, once your CIP hopefully is passed, we're talking about the operating budget, we're talking about forecasting over a longer period. On the operating side, we then turn to the individual projects that are in the 22 CIP, and we start looking at those programs from July through December. And that's kind of how the committee worked last year. We started talking about leasing, we started talking about sidewalks. And so as you're building up to the next construction season, getting ready for 2022, you start getting into, especially like on the programs, which sidewalks are going to be addressed, which medians are going to be addressed. Because if we have that conversation now, the conversation really is a year and a half out from when the work's going to be done. So we were thinking that if you use the first half of the year to prepare the big scope, the big picture for 2022, that the second half of the year is when you dive into the programmatic and then individual project updates. Councilman, is that okay? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's kind of what we were thinking. So for today, I'm going to ask Steve to talk about just the summary in terms of the different categories. And then we're obviously here, we have the full team here. We have both Public Works and Utilities and Facilities here, if there are particular projects you want to talk about. But what we'd like feedback on specifically is this in line with what you expect going into 22 in terms of how we're spending it? So Steve, I'll turn it over to you if you're ready.
Great. And hopefully you can hear me a little better today. On your screen right now is a breakdown of how the capital requests are split between the categories of facilities, neighborhoods, public safety, quality of life, streets, traffic, and utilities and water. And on the bottom of the screen, you can see here that of the requests of $99 million of requests, 44% of it belongs to utilities, 36.5% of it is streets. The rest of it balances out. As you go across, you'll notice that mid 50% number is fairly consistent with utilities, and the mid to low 20s is streets. If we look at the actual requests, and this is the sheet that you received on Friday, there's a variety of ways, of course, as you know, that we fund these programs. The GO bonds typically gets a fair amount of the attention. And of the requests that have been made so far, you see about $10 million in requests for 2022. That complies with the resolution that was passed by council for 22, 21, and 20 to average at $33 million. Or to total at $33 million rather. And then you see 9 million, an average of 9. And then we jump to almost $19 million in 2026 because of a couple of street projects. In streets, and Chairman, I don't know how deep you want to go into these projects.
Yeah, I don't know that we have time to go through them individually. I think if you would just point out, kind of hit the high points of the projects that you think will garner interest here, that'd be great. Sure.
The one that's getting a fair amount of attention, or the two that are getting a fair amount of attention, are Huntoon and Urish. And to comply with the $9 million number, we've pushed those back. And in fact, Urish ends up splitting out over a couple of years. I think the other project that has some interest is also the South Topeka Boulevard from 29th to 37th. Again, we've pushed those back to try to comply with the $9 million cap on the GO bonds. When it comes to the Fix Our Streets Fund, you'll see some work on Topeka Boulevard, some work on Northwest Tyler, and some work on Southeast Quincy. Your pavement management program is running between 6.3 and $7.6 million a year. Any questions?
Steve, what is the half-cent sales tax? What's the annual revenue roughly?
Jessica, 13?
I was thinking 14, but we'll get the actual number for you.
Okay, I was just kind of looking at the annual totals that are proposed out there, and just to point out that it looks like we're putting the bulk of the sales tax on the street, so to speak. We're actually doing projects with it as opposed to internal services or other things. So that's great.
Absolutely. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Jessica, anything else?
No, I mean, I think just, I guess in pointing out, we obviously have the utilities section of the capital book, and I see that Braxton's on here and Sylvia, so I'm sure they could speak to it. So that's the largest chunk, and then followed by the different sales tax, street focused and economic development focused projects. And then you have the geo bonds, and with the cap, there's a very limited number of projects that we can utilize that funding for. And then you have the smaller pieces, donations, federal, and then some of the cash funded projects. And so some of those cash funded projects, they're in the operating fund, so they are funded, while some of them these are priority projects, but we don't have funding quite yet. So if we have reserves or other operating areas where we can identify funding, we will. So if there's just feedback on that overall approach, that would be greatly appreciated to make sure we're on track.
Mr. Chair, looks like on our 3-year annual on House Senate, we're running about 15.3.
Thanks, Steve. All right, and I think we do have a Saturday work session early in February to go through, I assume, go through the CIP projects in more detail.
Exactly. So, sorry, Chair. So, if the way it was communicated to us was that we would show this to the infrastructure committee, and that with your acknowledgement, with your feedback, we would then move forward and publish the proposed book, which is what would be looked at the workshop on the 6th. And the individual departments will actually be choosing the large projects, the ongoing projects of interest, specific projects basically that they've had a lot of feedback on. They'll be sharing those in detail on the 6th, and then we'll all be prepared for any additional questions.
All right. And I think the other thing that might be worth mentioning is the categories that you started the discussion with. Those were those at the request of Councilman Duncan last year to put the CIP into categories that maybe covered the entire gamut?
Sure. So Councilman Duncan requested that the book and the presentation be, I think, more aligned with those categories. The capital plan already included those categories, but it wasn't as much of a focus. So the goal was to try to show some of the priority.
Very good. All right. Any other questions from the committee? All right. Thank you very much. Okay, we've given Hannah a little bit of a break. Let's move back to item number 4, facilities overview. I assume that's Hannah.
Yes, I'm just pulling up my PowerPoint. 1 second. There we go. Okay. Sorry. Okay. All right, so you should all be able to see my screen again. And now you get to listen to me talk for probably another 30 minutes. So today we're going to discuss facility operations, kind of give a very brief high-level overview of facilities and some of the things that we cover, and then really deep dive a little bit more into the firm, our capital improvement program that is included in the CIP, and how we're going forward with that project, as well as at the end, Liz had sent a resolution just a little bit ago. Apologize, it wasn't sent out a little bit earlier, but we'll go over a couple items that we'd like your approval for. So first, facility operations. Our facilities department covers a wide range of items, everything from pest control and janitorial services to general maintenance and electrical, plumbing, HVAC services. So a very wide range of items that are under this division. We provide full maintenance and building improvements at 72 buildings and structures across the city. And then for an additional 39, we provide as needed maintenance and project management. So in total, we're looking at just under 2 million square feet. A large chunk of that is our parking infrastructure, as our parking garages are very large. So they take up a good 60% of that square feet. So our facilities division is made up of 19 full-time employees. They're dedicated to the city's infrastructure, both with facilities and parking. Really, this org chart just kind of goes to show how we've set up the team to take a more proactive approach to facility management. In 2020, this was one of the divisions that we did restructure and did it under the basis of focus areas. So the areas that were developed, it was around the fundamental idea that let people do what they're good at, right? We created a team of individuals that, focused on their particular value that they bring to the organization, with knowledge and skills and abilities that were specific to their area. It, takes a completely different approach and skill set to, run a project effectively, or fix a sink, or process invoices, or even just analyze, our cost of ownership of our assets. Before, all these functions were under the facilities organization, and were largely put on, that of our individuals who were in the field and had dual function. So with that concept in mind, we restructured this division. We aligned parking maintenance under facilities to better leverage, the knowledge and skill base of that team. We created a project stream, so we could truly focus on our firm program as well as other infrastructure and maintenance projects needed for both facilities and parking. We separated the administrative functions into another division that is under the Public Works umbrella that focuses on business operations and analytics. So within that division, they took on things such as our PO processing, our monthly invoices, a lot of the budget and analysis that we do, and including some of the operational KPIs that we put together. So knowing that was going to be a tight agenda, try to keep the overview very tight, but if you have any specific questions, please let me know. I'm happy to dive into it. We do have our facilities team and our facilities manager, Dee, on the call as well. So any questions before I continue into the firm overview? Okay.
Doesn't look like there's any question.
Okay, so we'll keep going. So firm overview, high level, the firm was established in 2020 as part of the CIP. It supports all non-enterprise funded buildings and structures for facility improvements, repairs, and maintenance that are classified under the capital umbrella. Prior to this funding source being established, facilities didn't have a consistent funding for capital improvement. So it was really as things came and what we could afford within the operational budget. This really prohibited the department from truly executing to a proactive facilities maintenance approach, and really eliminated any value in replacement cycle planning, as we were just trying to catch up oftentimes and not being able to meet the full demands of what was broken. So Years of this deferred building maintenance and improvements has resulted in a number of our critical systems and structural components that are past the estimated useful life, and that we are doing Band-Aid approach repairs just to try to extend out incrementally. So established within the CIP, the firm in total for 2020 was 2.3 million, and then 2021 forward is 1.6. We broke out the firm funding from the CIP into essentially 3 different focus areas. The zoo component out of 2020, the 615,000, was estimated off of a list of known deferred maintenance items. That was part of the conversations when they were having them initially in 2020 or 2019, excuse me, and has been removed from 21 forward due to limitations on the cap for our geo bonding. The fire station renovation program, we've allotted different amounts for each year, but focusing a specific amount to fire stations so that we can truly capitalize that dollar and optimize it within the fire station realm. And then the balance is the facilities improvement fund, which supports the rest of our non-enterprise buildings. So looking at the zoo, some of the projects that were completed in 2020 were the Regentain transfer door, flooring projects, and a number of the different exhibit areas, the hippo shade, walk-in freezer, drainage, glass. So as you can see, it's kind of a composition of a number of smaller items. There are larger items that are thrown in there, but a lot of these are the incremental just pieces and things that hadn't been completed in years due to lack of funding. So in 21, we do have a few things on the plan that are in process, leveraging the carryover dollars from the 2020 CIP. Some of those do extend to, sidewalk and curb removal, some roofing projects, and then some specific areas to some of their different staffing areas. For the fire station repair and improvement program, we've approached this one slightly differently. The fire stations, as we know, are numerous and have a wide range of needs. So we have some that are very, very old, and we have some that are a little bit more modern and we've done recent remodels in. We also know that from a strategic direction going forward, there's a need to make, more inclusive fire stations in terms of how our facilities are set up for both our male and female firefighters, as well as additional safety enhancements that we need to install in a number of our bays and change out areas. So to help meet the needs and help balance out the needs of, ideal improvements with replacement, we've actually partnered with SG develop a multi-year program that will take into account those different elements and help prioritize in a very systematic and repeatable way the different identified areas of improvement and repair. So we started that engagement in 2020. As we know, 2020 kind of blew up on us, so it's a little bit delayed from our initial timeline. But starting last week, SDG started their condition assessments of our fire stations. So they'll be compiling a comprehensive list of all the areas that we need to address immediately and as well as future anticipated needs. And then they'll work with both our internal Public Works Facilities Division as well as the fire station to determine priority and build out a plan that we'll bring to this committee later to review and approve. So for our general facility repairs in 2020, we completed a few. We had our TPAC reheat coils that needed to be replaced. There were some humidity issues causing very substantial usability function in that basement. We had some concrete repair and some lighting. For 2020, for the basic of the firm, we honestly took a step back and I came to the vision in 2020. We had a lot of changes within that time frame, and we really focused on making sure that we could look at it in totality and make sure that we're best utilizing the dollars forward. So with that, how we're going to approach the firm. Essentially, we need to prioritize all of the known issues. So we're going to work with a couple of outside partners and create comprehensive condition assessments for all of our facilities. We will time this with the matrix with anticipated funding year based on the amount that we have within the CIP. Our assessment matrix will include the current state of the asset as well as some additional supplemental questions that we'll go over in a minute to determine the priority. So does it meet one of our strategic initiatives? Is it a regulatory issue? Some of those generic questions to help prioritize items accordingly. The anticipated funding levels are really a combination of going to be firm dollars out of the CIP, as well as some operational funds that will help support the comprehensive life cycle management. So items that are primarily just carpet or just painting walls. Some of those things that are general maintenance items, but don't necessarily meet the threshold of a capital investment. We're going to utilize our operational dollars to better spread out and make sure we're meeting all of the needs. So the condition assessment that we're putting together, each component will be evaluated on a score of 1 to 5. So critical, immediate need, or 5 like or new. And then the supplemental questions that we're going to ask to prioritize regulatory or code requirement, safety concern present, does the project affect a level of service? Will we see a return on investment? So a lot of this is looking at the total cost of ownership. What's that going to be over a 3, 5, 10-year period? Does it improve our operational efficiencies? And does the project support the improvement of environmental stewardship? So is it efficient? Does it fall into the sustainability category? Or does it consolidate with other projects well? So we could see a savings if we did more than one of these at the same time. So if we have the scalability of an item, then we want to make sure that we're looking at those together as a package. So most of this will be done in Excel. Tends to be where I go with things. But the different pieces of our file will include, the required information about the asset, down to the manufacturer, model number, serial number, the typical stuff that we want to identify for each of them. We will have specific attributes for our different items. So if it's mechanical, we'll have different questions versus electrical versus plumbing. We will estimate out the cost of our replacement in $2020 and project a future replacement year. So a key component of what our full life cycle planning is it's not just next year or the next 5 years that correlate with the CIP. It's truly looking out over the course of the next 10, 20 years, and when would we anticipate needing to replace this item? And then building in the funding source appropriately. So we're able to better track and react to things in a more sustainable way. And then the condition assessment and assessment questions. Now, as we're all familiar, you can't always plan everything. So best of intentions. With our current facilities, we know there's a lot of deferred maintenance. The items that we included on the 2020 list that you saw we were able to utilize funds for, none of them were planned. They were all based on emergency need. So we're going to allocate, as part of our life cycle plan, a certain percentage of our budget every year towards unexpected repair and replacement. So it's items that maybe we had out within the next 5 years that we have to pull up to this year based on the fact that it failed unexpectedly. By building this into our plan, we will allow ourselves the flexibility to not derail the direction that we're moving to as a facilities management in a proactive sense. We'll still give ourselves that flexibility to react in the moment as needed, but still hold to the strategic plan on how we're going to replace out in a timely manner. Historically, because of the lack of funding, unexpected issues were largely made, around the premise of we don't have enough. So we did a lot of Band-Aid effects. We would look at the initial upfront cost and not necessarily the total cost of ownership. So is it going to be more efficient? Maybe it costs us 5% more, but we'll receive a return on investment of 3 or 5 years. Those sort of decision-making processes weren't commonplace as the funding was sporadic. So based on our current age and condition of our assets, we're allotting a higher percentage of our funding source in the next 3 years, and then starting to step it down. So for 2020 through 2023, we're estimating a 30% allotment, which seems substantial until we get into some of the items that are going to be on our list that would fall in that category. In 2024 to 2025, we drop it down to 20%. And then in 2026 forward, only 15%, as at that point, we would anticipate being on this more proactive cycle and hopefully reduce the number of unexpected failures that happen within our assets. So this is what is in the document that Liz sent out right before the meeting. So this is our request for approval. The LEC cooling towers and chiller replacements at $400,000. Last year, we had a couple unexpected failures at the LEC that resulted in our police department, which is a 24-hour facility, getting insanely hot. So hot, in fact, one day they had to send staff home. So we are replacing out one full side of that system, one cooling tower and one chiller. The LEC boiler repair, a couple for the zoo, condition assessments, which is going to let us really engage and start on the facility side of our long-range plan. And then half of the unexpected repairs and replacement allotment. What this $250,000 will do will give us spending authority to make those decisions real time as needed. We will come back and report on any utilization of that bucket to this committee and discuss what those items were so that you are still aware. But that way, if an HVAC system goes out, we can react in the moment and be more responsive to our city facilities. So this is included in a resolution that Liz had just sent out for your consideration. Any questions on that before we go?
Councilman Emerson?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Hannah, there have been various discussions we've had about the LEC being relocated or being consolidated somewhere else. Is this something that immediately has to be done, or is there another way to do this? I guess if it's only going to be there another year or two, and I don't know what the plan is right now, but I guess if you could kind of educate me a little more about the timing of this, number one, please.
Yeah. So it's not something I feel like can wait. And we are doing the cheaper version. So we have worked with our partner to understand what different options we'd have. This only replaces half of the system. So if the other half, which is of equal age, were to fail, similar to what we had happen last year, we'd still only be able to operate the LEC at about a 75% capacity. So we still would have a noticeable difference in impact to the department within that building. But based on 2 major failures last year, I don't feel it can wait, given the nature of the use of that building.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up. Does the county, through the sheriff's department, do they pay half of this?
They don't pay half. They pay 30%.
So is the actual amount a lot more than this? We're just paying $400,000 as our share?
It's actually less. The $400,000 gives us the spending authority to start and engaging into the contract. The amount that will hit the firm will be less than 30%, so it won't hit that funding balance.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions, Councilman Padilla, Lesser? All right. So we do have a resolution. I assume everybody had a chance to look at it. Just to be clear, these items are currently in the CIP. They just followed it. So they were approved earlier this year in the CIP. In total, we are just approving them per the resolution that requires it to go through this committee and then to the full council. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. I would look for Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Chair. I guess just a clarification that I just brought up the resolution, and in there it is just shows $250,000 for this cooling system. Is that the correct number?
It is not. We got a new bid, so I I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. We got an updated number from our partner late last week, and I didn't catch to update that. I apologize. Thank you.
So do we need to amend that resolution to show for, I guess one question is what's actually in the CIP? What number is in the approved CIP?
The CIP shows the firm in total. So it shows the 1.6 million annually.
All right. So we're not increasing that total. It's just part of that. Got it. All right. I guess if there's no other questions, our charge would be to approve the resolution or make the recommendation to the full council that resolution gets approved. Is there a motion or further discussion?
I do have one more question. So the initial bid was 250 and now it's 400. Is that correct?
We had updated the direction we were going with it. So initially we were talking about replacing only out the 2 cooling towers. So at the LEC, it's comprised of 2 cooling and 2 chillers to make up the comprehensive system. Based on the 2 failures last year and the age and condition of the chillers, we've changed direction and decided to replace out 1 full unit, the chiller and the cooling tower, versus trying to replace out both cooling towers. It has pros and cons on both. The cooling towers do have rust that is literally breaking off. So we have to be more diligent in our cleaning and maintenance to make sure that that stays out of the system. But in looking at the risks of having a full system shut down again, replacing out the cooling towers would not necessarily prevent that from happening.
And just out of curiosity, did this item go out for bid?
It has not yet. So it's just in the design stages. We have not put it out to bid yet. This is based on
Engineering specs?
yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
it's Mary Feeney. The resolution that Liz sent you is inaccurate because it's an older one. So the numbers that you would be approving are the ones that appear in Hannah's PowerPoint.
Okay. So.
And the resolution will be changed to reflect those projects.
Okay, so just to make sure, and I don't have that resolution pulled up. So let's get an amendment to change those items. So the 400,000, we changed from 250 to 400. What are the other numbers that change? Somebody looking at that resolution?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. They also have, on our slide here, they have a number 6, unexpected repairs and replacements, 250,000, and that's not in the resolution.
Correct.
Okay, I guess what I would look for here is a motion to approve the resolution amended to reflect the numbers on slide 15 of the presentation.
And I guess a question for legal, Mary, can we do that? Can we use this slide as our 1 through 6 and replace the 1 through 5 on here? Or do we need to change?
No, that's fine. If you approve the list that's on this slide, I will incorporate that into the resolution that will then be presented to the governing body.
Okay, with that amendment then, Chair, I move for approval.
All right, we have a motion. We have by Councilman Emerson. We have a second by Councilman Lesser. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Seeing no opposition, that motion is approved. Hannah, you've got a few more minutes ahead of us, it looks like.
I do. So that was just facilities. So as I mentioned, The firm program is not inclusive of enterprise funded assets. So parking infrastructure, being an enterprise solution, is a separate section that we want to go over some of the things that we're working with. We are including parking as part of our comprehensive plan. So while it may not be part of the firm, parking as well as the envelopes for utilities for their buildings are included in our comprehensive view. The MEMP for utilities is unique, obviously, to their plants. So they manage that very well, but we are going to include different pieces of the infrastructure that's enterprise-based, just not in the funding out of the capital funds. So getting started with what's included in parking infrastructure. Parking consists of 7 public parking garages, approximately 1.4 million square feet, valued at approximately 67 million. So they're very large, very expensive assets. We also manage 8 surface parking lots, 4 of which are for public use. The other ones are employee-based. There are also 3,200 on-street parking spaces. 1.3 of them are metered. So they have the mechanical meters that we also manage, making sure batteries are replaced, heads are damaged, and are fully functional. So the parking garages are the largest component of parking infrastructure and the most costly. They are, not only large, they have about 3,200 parking spaces across the 7 different garages that pre-COVID were averaging anywhere between 60 and 70% total occupancy. And that's cumulative across all 7, some at various rates of utilization. So to give an idea of parking garages, the estimated just generic useful life is approximately 50 years. The average number of years left at our specific city-owned garages based on industry baseline is 14 years. You can see on this graph where the different garages lie. So Coronado is our oldest garage, and it's technically past that 50-year mark. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's unusable. It just means that we have to be more diligent on the maintenance so that it doesn't fall into disarray. Crosby is our newest one in 2007, and it has many years left on its estimated useful life. So looking at what it costs to maintain these, we had a lot of conversations pre-COVID about rate increases and infrastructure and parking in totality. And so one of the biggest things that we talked a lot about was the deferred maintenance and the current condition of these assets. So the last complete assessment that was done in 2005 across all 7 garages. Per those numbers and the assumptions of the maintenance that should have been done between that study and today, there was about 2.3 million of deferred maintenance that had not been completed. We are doing a new condition assessment. 2005 is a long time ago, and deferred maintenance has a way of exponentially getting worse. So we are currently working on refreshing that to make sure we can understand where our priorities lie and what to tackle first. So far, we've done 4 garages, and the preliminary results of those is we have 1.2 million that they recommend we do this year. And then another 4.5 over the next 5 years for a 10-year total of 6.7 million in deferred and maintenance activities. So with that, it's gotten a little bit worse in some of our garages from the initial assessment of our deferred maintenance from the 2005 report. And we still have some more garages and different mechanisms that we still need to explore. So with that, any questions, I'll be happy to answer, but that's the end of hearing me speak tonight.
Great job, by the way, on both of these issues. Appreciate the thought and appreciate the kind of the thinking that's going into financing the maintenance of these facilities. I have a question that really, and it probably applies to both the regular facilities and the parking garages. And I don't think there's an answer today, but just something to be thinking about. As we look at all of the buildings that the city owns, particularly those that aren't funded through a revenue fund. Are we looking, or do we have an idea of the utilization of those buildings? Have we done a needs assessment so we understand whether the space is being utilized? Really boils down to do we need every building that we own? Do we need all of the parking garages? Are there other opportunities that we haven't traditionally looked at? So kind of a rhetorical question, Hannah, but any thoughts you have along those lines would be appreciated.
Actually, I do have quite a few. I always have thoughts, but so with parking garages, we have looked at it. We do have a couple that are, and even pre-COVID, underutilized. However, the appetite to purchase a parking garage from the public side is relatively small. We have done a pro forma to understand the cost to the city, and based on how our parking ecosystem operates, some of the higher maintenance garages are also some of the larger ones, and they kind of balance off. So in terms of selling off different pieces, we haven't yet found an avenue that would work or interested in buyer in terms of parking. For the city facilities, we have a couple components. So I talked a lot about our condition assessments and coming up with a replacement cycle plan. And then the layer onto that we're also working on at the same time is understanding our total cost of ownership. So part of that division I mentioned earlier on the budget and performance and analytics side, one of the areas that they are starting to look into is our utility utilization by building and how it's historically changed, so that we can put that number together. With the way we currently manage it, it's not real time, it's not overly easy to get to some of the numbers, but we're working through a process to be able to aggregate that in and include it in our analysis. We're also, as part of the CARES funded initiative, in evaluating our buildings for space mitigation efforts to make sure that we can have our employees safely but return back to work with the appropriate distance between staff, appropriate setups, the plexi shield, some of those other elements. As part of that, one of the outputs that we are getting are actually comprehensive floor plans of all of our administrative areas. So we're truly capturing how many staff are working out of which facility, how much staff is dedicated, how much area is dedicated to each staff member, where departments are where, so that we can take that data and start to aggregate into our comprehensive facilities plan, where buildings that are potentially underutilized or ones that are overutilized, and we need to spread out based on the total cost that is incurring for the city. We don't have it yet, but we are working that direction.
Okay, that's really good. I guess I'd throw, there's always the option to continue to own and maintain and operate. There's the option to sell. The third option that sometimes we're a little reticent to look at is simply to demolish. If the cost of maintaining a parking structure, for instance, is over time cost prohibitive, probably something we ought to throw into the mix. I'm not suggesting that we do that we actually demolish any structures, but that ought to be an option that we consider as we move forward. Councilman Emerson, any questions? Councilman Padilla? Councilman Lesser? All right. Okay, I appreciate all of that. We're going to move to item number 6, which is an update of the Southwest 12th Street project. Brian, I assume that's yours?
Yes, it is. Can you all hear me? Okay. Just wanted to start with a brief history on the project. The Southwest 12th Street project was approved by Shawnee County voters back in November of 2014, and design started in the spring of 2019. The initial cost that we used in the CIP was $13.18 million, which was for reconstruction of the roadway. It did become apparent during the design that we needed to upgrade our underground utilities during this process. The project agreed to cover roughly $1.1 million in relocation upgrades to existing city facilities, with our utility department covering the bridge of that. 6 bids were received on December 21st of 2020. With the base bid that includes all utility replacements and selected alternatives, the low bid was from Bettis Asphalt, and it was just under $13.5 million. With the 6 qualified bidders, staff felt very comfortable with the bids that were received. Based on the bids received, combined with the estimated costs for design, inspection, and acquisition of easements and rights-of-way, the total project cost is estimated at $14.635 million. This does include $1.1 million for the utilities and the selected alternate bid items. The project, as a result, is $1.455 million over the budget shown within the CIP. And before an award can be made, a budget amendment is required. So staff is recommending the budget increase to $15 million. This amount provides a contingency of just under $400,000 to help account for unanticipated issues that will arise during the design. And tonight we are just want to give you that update on that, and we will be bringing an amendment back to the City Council on February 2nd.
Thank you, Brian. The main source of funding for this project, and you said it, but I'll just reiterate, is the half-cent countywide sales tax, correct? Yes.
That is correct.
Approved by the voters. Any questions for Brian? Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is the amendment because of the utilities that we need to fix? Is that why we're having the amendment? Why do we need to make the amendment?
Well, actually, the Shawnee County voters, when they approved it, we can actually use that sales tax to upgrade utilities associated with the project. And when we began looking at that initial design, it was a reasonable kind of a compromise to say we could cover roughly $1.1 million in those costs. Utility department is actually covering an additional $1.7 million for their portion of it. We did select a number of alternatives that we'd like to see with the project, and with the combination of that $1.1 million and those alternatives, we're about $1.455 million over the budget. So that utilities is a component of that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, seeing no other questions, no actions required here. You have that on the agenda for a week from tomorrow, I believe. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Thank you, Brian. Item number 7 is discussion, presentation, and possible action of for a resolution approving sidewalk project North Topeka West. We do have, I think Teresa Miller has asked to make some comments when we're finished with the discussion here. So Brian, assume this is yours as well.
Yeah, I'll start out with this, and then Taylor will be making a presentation. The infill sidewalk program does construct both new sidewalks and restores existing sidewalks to provide for that continuous compliant pedestrian connectivity. And those are identified typically in the pedestrian master plan or through requests from the public. During the resolution that was approving the 2021 to 2030 CIP, it does require the governing body approval for general obligation bond projects in the area of facilities, sidewalks, and fleet replacement. City staff did select North Topeka West as the area for the 2021 infill sidewalk program, and staff is requesting this selection be approved. There's currently $600,000 in the budget for this project and funded through GO bonds. And Taylor is here to make a presentation this afternoon on the 2021 program.
All right, can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Bill, did you want to say a few words before I started, or?
No, you go right ahead.
Okay. All right. So we gave a presentation about the pedestrian plan to the group a couple months ago. And so that was just really the back overview. And just to refresh you guys, the pedestrian plan, we came up with a heat map based on our highest demands for pedestrian need. And so here's some of the criteria that was used to weigh out this heat map. And so as you can see, where the red is identified is where the highest demand for pedestrian sidewalks occurred. And so with that, we came up with our priority improvement locations, as Brian mentioned. And so for this year, North Topeka West was the neighborhood that's selected for 2021. And this was selected back when the plan had went through. So North Topeka West is a very large NIA area. And so we did have to condense it just a little bit, just to make it a little bit more manageable. So the area that we're looking at is the area between Topeka Boulevard, Lyman, Vale, and Gordon. And so as you can see here is just the outline of the area with basically showing the red is no sidewalks and the green is where sidewalks are currently. We were able to see, so I overlaid it with the heat map to see where the highest demand would be. So in the red is our first priority area, and then the yellow would be our second priority area based off of the heat map. We also are taking into consideration that Tyler and Lyman are both in the CIP, so sidewalks will be constructed with those street projects. So we won't be tackling them with our projects, but we'll make sure that we are taking them into account and either tying up to them or just something like that so that we're not duplicating efforts. So, and those two are definitely within our boundary. This is not in your guys' PowerPoint if you took a look at this, but I was able to go out and do my field inventory of the conditions. And so I went in and I basically was able to categorize all the conditions of all the sidewalks in this area. And then as you can see, the blue means no sidewalks. So we have a lot of areas with no sidewalks. However, we also have a lot of areas that are without curb and gutter. So that makes putting in sidewalks a little bit more difficult. But I also overlaid this with the heat map. So you can really see where the need for sidewalks are. And you can see it's kind of far away, but you can kind of tell that there's a little bit of sidewalks going on here, but there definitely is a need for more sidewalks. So the next step would be to hire the consultants or to do their own inventory to come out and to see what is actually feasible with our money, as well as with the topography that we're working with and the conditions, the existing conditions. And with that, that's where we'll kind of figure out how much it'll cost to tackle this neighborhood. And then depending on if there's additional funds, we usually like to take our funds and we'll go to a corridor as well as a neighborhood. And so some of the corridors that were identified within the pedestrian plan, which we believe that we are ready to tackle, are Topeka Boulevard, which we have plans already drawn up for 29th to 37th for the opposite side that was not completed in this past year, as well as going north of 29th could be a option. And then the second area that we would like to see tackled would be the Jardine area, basically school sidewalks around the school. But those would be definitely secondary. We wouldn't know if we'll be able to get to them or not, but once we figure out the money. And that is basically where we're at with North Topeka West and what our intentions are going forward. Is there any questions?
Any questions from the committee? We do have an action item here, but before we do that, Liz, do you know, is Teresa Miller on?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. You wanted to make some comments, ma'am?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much. Since you have gone through did such a great job of all this, it looks awesome. But in November, we had a 16-year-old girl get hit and killed on Lyman Road. And the reason why, it's a narrow street, there is no sidewalks, and the lighting's terrible. The lighting is being looked at, but we need, because there are so many people without cars that live in those trailer courts that walk Lyman Road all the time. And it's a very dangerous road, and I don't want to see anybody else lose their life. I've heard so many horror stories from those people telling me how many times they've almost been hit. We need a sidewalk all the way down Lyman Road to Vale to keep those people from having to jump out of the street when cars come, because it's just a horrifying stories you hear from the people. But we did lose a girl that was 16 years old, lost her life in November because there is no sidewalks. So while you're looking at sidewalks over here, and I know it's not in the red area, but it really needs some type of sidewalk down that road to keep the people safe. And that's about all I got to say, hon.
All right. Thank you, Teresa.
You're welcome.
I guess I would ask City Manager for comments on that. City Manager?
Sure. For us, we understand the situation that's occurred there and definitely support that there's something that needs to be looked at. And Brian can probably cover what the schedule is better on the Lyman Street work that's going to be done and work that's scheduled to be done there. But that's part of the issue is we have it planned and it is in the works to be able to put sidewalks on that area. But it is planned at this point to be done with, in conjunction with the street project. And so, Brian, what else can you tell about the project and expectations, timing?
Well, what we've submitted, the project was not in the CIP in the 21 to 2030 cycle. We did add it this year. And so if you look at the summary sheet that Steve and Jessica submitted, there is a project that starts in 2026 in year 5 of the CIP for design of the improvements to Lyman, and that would actually go from Tyler all the way to Northwest Vale. What we're proposing is a curb and gutter enclosed storm sewer and sidewalks on both sides between Tyler and Clay, where the school is. And then on the south side from Clay further to the west all the way to Vale. One of the challenges is what we do at the railroad tracks. As anybody who's driven knows, it's kind of a rise right there. Typically railways are very concerned about safety of their vehicles, their workers, as well as pedestrians and cars, but we haven't approached them about how we would do a pedestrian crossing at this time. But the plan is designed in year 5 with construction in year 6 to year 7.
Okay. Is there any way you can keep me informed about that? Because people ask me all the time, what are you going to do? And I told them they need to learn patience for one thing, because it's just not done overnight. And so far, they're listening, but, sometimes they get a little upset.
No, we'll definitely keep you informed of any changes to the process.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Vadivia Alcala, if you wanted to make a comment.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for speaking, Teresa. Basically, I would reiterate what Teresa said. This is a very vulnerable area. We should actually be looking at it as a public health and safety issue as well. There are a number of children that live in that trailer court that are walking on the side streets. It's something in 2021 that we shouldn't have to see in the capital city of Topeka, that our citizens, that their children are having to walk to school in the manner that they do, and so unprotected and vulnerable. David Bevins is working with a very strong contact person that I've been able to get with Westar, and that lighting is going to be a priority. I would ask that we keep working with Brian and with David to make this a priority for the sidewalks. I understand also the issue with the curb and gutter. But again, there are memorials that are set up in this particular space of roadway because of the number of tragedies that have occurred. So I would just ask that you keep that in mind as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. All right, we do have an action item here, which is to approve or to make a recommendation to the City Council on the resolution. Any further discussion or would entertain a motion?
Move approval.
Have approval by Councilman Emerson, a second by Councilman Padilla. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, seeing no opposition, the recommendation to the City Council for approval passes. All right, next item is general discussion of sidewalks. I believe Brian will lead that, and I know Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala also has some comments. So turn it over to Brian.
Thank you. Just as an update, there are currently a number of different ways to get sidewalks installed. Right now, if you build a new home or a new business, sidewalks are required to be installed with that construction, typically. Individuals and business can also install sidewalks on their own. We do include sidewalks on a number of street reconstruction projects. We also do a number of sidewalks with targeted short neighborhoods if those are identified as a need and priority by the residents. We do have our infill sidewalk program, which fills gaps in existing sidewalks and can be used to replace deteriorated sections of sidewalks. We have our sidewalk replacement program, commonly called the 50-50 program. And we also do go after a number of grants, including Safe Routes to School for sidewalk replacements. If we have a street with curb and gutter, depending upon the grades behind the curb, sidewalks can be fairly easily installed. We do have a number of streets around Topeka that are of a more rural section, as example, Lyman, where we have open ditches. Those create a lot of challenges for us. One of the options is to make shoulders wider. Pedestrians can use the shoulders, but that pushes the ditches further away from the roadway, which creates some right-of-way and driveway impacts. We can install sidewalks on the back side of the ditches. Again, that can create some right-of-way and access issues. We can put sidewalks in when we reconstruct the road when we go from a rural to an urban section, but that's significant cost for a project of that magnitude. And to note, citywide sales tax cannot be used to put sidewalks in where sidewalks currently do not exist. It can only be used to replace existing sidewalks. So with that, at the bottom of your brief sheet, you do have a few details regarding sidewalks. We currently have a record of 684 miles of sidewalks within the city of Topeka. Currently, sidewalks are defined anything from 3 foot wide to our 10-foot shared use path. Maintenance responsibilities for sidewalks go back to the abutting property owner. What we're used to are sidewalks varying somewhere between 3 and 6 feet. In recent years, we started the shared use path model, which anywhere from 8 to 10 feet in width. Our current standard is 10 feet. Currently, they're new enough. We haven't had any failures, but we do expect a question to come up at some point in time in the near future is who's responsible for maintenance of shared use paths when they abut a residential or a business property. So those are just some topics to get the discussion started today.
Thank you, Brian. Questions or comments? I'll ask the committee first. Councilman Lesser, Councilman Emerson.
Yes, Chair.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Brian, I had a question, I guess. Isn't there still the option of if enough people in the area want to sign a petition to establish a benefit district, Is that correct?
I'm going to actually defer to Mary on that.
Yes, that's still a possibility.
So a neighborhood on their own, if they wanted to, if what more than 50% of the homeowners wanted to do it, you would go in and do whatever area they comprised, and bonds would be issued, and then they'd pay specials over 20 years to get it done, correct? And that might be a lot faster way of getting it done.
You know, I'll look at the ordinance because that's not something that we generally do, but I know that there is a provision in the ordinances that covers that. So let me do that, and then I will share it with the committee. I'll send something out.
Great, thank you. That was my only question.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Padilla? No questions. Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala?
Thanks, Chair. I would certainly like to learn more about that. Tony, good comments because that's the first I've heard. And certainly that would be something that would be an area of interest. The other thing I just wanted to comment on, well, two things. One, we definitely need more sidewalks in North Topeka. It's especially when you see older folks walking in mud and, you know, gravel and slipping and all of that. It's not what we want our capital city to be. It's not what we want to tell our kids that our capital city is about. You know, we want to see the equity everywhere. But the other comments I just wanted to make were, having watched last week's meeting on the 50/50 program and the changes that, I don't know if y'all have actually recommended the changes that staff is bringing up, but I am just not for it at all. I would say it feels to me like it's a way for the city staff to divest from the taxpayer. I have a number of concerns from elderly navigating the process where you want to have it more with the contractor and the citizen and get the city out of the middle. Also, the amount of public education that would be needed. And I mean, more than putting that on a letter and mailing it out to them, I think the public education on it would be pretty intense. And then I have concerns about the mechanisms that would need to be or considered or up for consideration that would need to be in place to have consistent quality of work with the list of contractors that were to be made available to citizens. So those are just, three of the reasons I just don't think it's a good move. And that's it. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Brian or City Manager, have we finalized and I think this is just a city policy direction for the 50/50 sidewalk program. Give us a quick refresher, if you would, Brian.
Yeah, the refresher would be, it is a policy that we've been following, that basically the city bids out the work at the beginning of the year. When someone's interested in participating, we would let them know ahead of time what their component or cost would be. Once we receive that information from them, or that payment from them, we put them on a list with our low bid contractor for the work. Sometimes that can actually take a month or longer because the contractor wants several projects to do before he mobilizes his crews to do it. What we had recommended back in I think November and in December was put more responsibility back on the abutting property owner who is responsible for the maintenance of the sidewalk. We'd still bid the work. We'd still provide an estimate to the residents. We would work with the residents all the way through the process, but they would be responsible for selecting one of the contractors and paying their portion of the work to the contractor directly. It does get staff out of the middle of some of the disputes that we've been having, and it puts the responsibility back on the property owner.
Councilwoman.
Thank you, Chair. I would just say, Brian, that working with them throughout the process was not something I heard in the meeting that I listened to for December. It was kind of like, here's the list and here you go. So it is somewhat heartening to know that, you're going to work with them along the way, that they'll know that there will be somebody within the city that can help them. Again, I'm placing specific emphasis on the elderly. So thanks.
Oh, no problem.
Thank you. City Manager, I'm wondering, I know some elements of neighborhood division or department is under your purview now.
Right.
I wonder if there's an option there for some of those folks to help. And I can see, some people can probably breeze through the process without any issues, but particularly some of the elderly folks that, have a more difficult time, where people, with difficulty of any sort, seems like there should be a fairly easy option for the city to help them walk through that. So wonder if that's something you could look into.
Sure. And I agree. I think that with community engagement and the intention with the ombudsman, that this type of thing is a perfect issue, that ombudsman's there to be able to help citizens that are having to deal with government, that they don't seem to be getting what they need or getting the runaround, and they are to cut through the issues and get to the root of and solve it with the other staff members to help with miscommunication. And so I think that's a perfect use of their time.
This is Teresa Miller. Can I speak on that?
Certainly.
Pardon me?
Yes.
Okay, let me give you an example, and this is why when they were reconstructing a lot of things for our neighborhood NIAs, the empowerment grant that they are so much wanting to get rid of, one of the very first things I did for an 80-some-year-old man that was out there every day, could hardly stand, was using a scraper to get the weeds out of his brick, and the bricks were all broken. We got an empowerment grant and replaced both sides, because he lived on a corner. We replaced all the sidewalk all the way down in front of his house and that whole block, and also on the other side of that whole block, with a grant from the empowerment grant. And it wasn't too long after that the man passed away, but he was so excited because years he had cleaned all those bricks off. But that's why that empowerment grant is so important, and that's why we also use it in the neighborhoods to replace sidewalks for the elderly that cannot afford even the 50% of what the project would cost.
Yes, City Manager.
Yeah, and under the New Dreams program, if a community or an NIA wanted to apply for sidewalks under the New Dreams program, the city allocated $200,000 for that. And we're right now, community engagement staff's in the middle of drafting the new application for the Dreams fund, which will have $200,000 available. And part of that will include a portion of the capital projects like we are talking about here, like sidewalks.
Thank you.
All right. In the interest of time, I believe.
Chair?
Yes, Mr. or Councilman Lesser.
I do want to point out that I would like I'd like to at least take a look at this is a great program. What's similar to this, though, as Tony and Sylvia can remember when prior to you coming on, Mr. Chair, was we have a similar program where we had a roof that was done for a Mrs. You remember her name, Tony? It was Ron Gish's mother is who it ended up being. And
emergency repair grant.
Yeah. And we had a little disconnect in regards to where we qualify these contractors and say, you have to meet these requirements, one of which is your insurance has to be this, et cetera, et cetera. and one of these individuals who we had approved, who she picked off our approved list, hit a riser, caught the house on fire, and basically total loss pretty much. And then at the end of the day, then individuals who we'd approved to do the roofing had an exclusion on his insurance policy that he couldn't do roofing, so his insurance didn't step in. And then we as a city said, we're not responsible. I'm not going to pretend to be lawyer, but then the information that we got was that no, we weren't responsible because of the way the law and vetting, blah. But at the end of the day, right's right, wrong's wrong. We gave you a list, said pick off this list, you picked off this list, and we had not properly vetted that person at the end of the day, as far as I'm concerned. And so, what have we done since then to make sure that we properly, vet these individuals? And if we're going to have an approved list, then I expect for us to be culpable, can't say the word, culpable in the event this same type of situation comes up again.
Well, I can't speak specifically as to what changes have been done, but I can go back and verify. I know that we've made a lot of efforts to ensure that individuals submit their certificate of insurance, that it applies to the right areas of the work that they're doing. But I think that's probably something I need to work with each staff in order to ensure that it's been done on every program. I think we're going that direction, but I think it bears a review to make sure that we're doing what you're saying, to make sure that we're protecting ourselves and the individuals that are hiring those contractors. So I agree with your sentiment, but I can't tell you 100% we've got that accomplished with every program. I'm going to have to readdress that with staff.
Do we require for this sidewalk, now I just kind of go back to the sidewalk program, same theory though, back to that one. Do we require these individuals to post a bond? These contractors to post a bond?
Brian or Robert are going to have to answer that.
I'll have to check on that. I'm not sure.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand.
I'll check on that. I'm not sure.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
My guess is that given the dollar figure, we're not asking them to do a bond. It's a pretty low dollar figure for them to post a bond on, given that some of those may only be $2,000 to $3,000 max. I wouldn't think they'd do a bond, but probably require them to have some type of liability insurance or that type of thing versus a bond. So,
well, what I would be looking at more on that would not be a performance and a contract bond, but more of some type of license and permit bond. That we had a requirement that lots of cities and municipalities, if you want to do electrical in Holton, I know Tony probably runs into this. If you want to do excavation in some, you have to post a $5,000 bond, $10,000 bond that allows you to be able to do that. That in the event, then if you don't complete the work, if you don't, pay your, then we can do that. And it would be more of a situation that goes on when they go on the program. You want to go on the program, you got to provide the insurance, and then you also have to provide this permit bond that in the event that you don't finish, et cetera, et cetera. Not necessarily a contract bond, performance bond for each sidewalk.
Yeah, I'll check with Brenda. I know that many of those licenses that we do for contracting and excavating and so on have to have that kind of proof. Don't know if it's a bond, but I know they do on our certificates of insurance and so forth to cover. So I'll check with Brenda, and we'll give that answer, send it out in an email.
Does the committee have the same concerns, or is that just mine?
Yeah, I think it's an issue that we definitely need to understand. Anybody else? Councilwoman Ortiz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad you brought that up, Mike, because it is a concern because anything that is done through the city is going to fall back on the city. And just because you get your insurance today and you get your little certificate, they could let them go the next day. So we need to make that very, very clear, or in that contract when they're signing it, that they realize that we're not responsible if that's what we're going to do. Because that's not the only time I've seen that done. I've seen shoddy work that we've had to get them back out there and do. And there's people that they've done. I'm sorry. And I said there's companies that have done shoddy work, and there's people that they just leave it like that. They don't know to call us, or they think it's a done deal. So those are my concerns is we've got to make sure that we have that in place, because that Gish one was a nightmare, and the lady lost her whole house. I mean, rightly so. I can understand where she was coming from, but what they pointed out is we made the list, we got the contractors in there, and, you know, they trusted us with that list. So we're going to have to really look into that. And I think even when we're doing the 50-50 sidewalks, somewhere in there, whether there's a clause that people need to know that they don't have to put up with it if it's cracking, or they need to know. I get so many calls on what is the warranty, how long does this last, you know, when can I complain, blah, blah, blah. I've went down 6th Street and seen work that hasn't been done that I went back and just checked it and made sure it was done. So these are just concerns that I too have. But when we start saying, here's a list and you can do that, I just think it's very, it's just not a good feel for me. So I just want to make sure that all of their I's are dotted and T's are crossed. Thank you, Mike, for bringing that up, because it was a nightmare.
Great comments. Appreciate that. All right. I think our next item is additional items from staff. And given the time, I guess I'd ask if any of those can be pushed to the next meeting, we do so. But if there's something that we need to discuss today, please, let's move ahead with it. I don't know if that's city manager or Mr. Faust.
If I go ahead, I'll just do real quick. What we did here was just provide some information about projects, kind of the current status going into 2021, whether it's out to bid, whether it's been bid, whether we're receiving RFPs or have received. So it's just kind of a general update on everything we got going on right now.
And probably the other thing, which would be from utilities, was an update to the driveway culverts policy that was brought up not too long ago. Councilwoman Ortiz wanted to bring that up, and so we updated it with types of material and how that program works.
Very good. Any questions on those items? Seeing none, other items from the committee. Okay, I know I had Councilwoman Valdivia-Alcalá ask for a little bit of time, and then I had a list of questions from Councilwoman Hiller. I think what again, in kind of the interest of time, I'm going to forward Councilwoman Hiller's list of questions to the city manager for our next, to be addressed at our next meeting. And Councilwoman Valdivia-Alcalá, I don't know if you want to ask the questions and maybe we can get those answered in our next committee meeting, or if there's one or two that can be answered today, let's just kind of walk through them, okay?
I feel that time crunch you're doing. I feel it.
Right.
It's not so subtle. Anyway, I'm going to bypass the water main breakage questions I have. This is all from last month's meeting, and I'll just forward those on to utilities. Something that was not talked about at last month's meeting, which has been an ongoing and consistent problem in District 2, is the odors that are coming from the pump station and also from the wastewater treatment facility. I know that I think Braxton and Sylvia are on here from utilities. And while I have a series of questions, I'm going to boil this down to one for right now. And that would be, does utilities currently use capture and treat technology at the wastewater plant?
So this is Braxton. I'm going to turn it over to Bob. Bob has years and years of experience and can basically go over the odor control measures that we are currently using at the wastewater treatment plant in Oakland that basically track with the industry's best practices.
Okay, let me just stop you for a minute. You guys have been really, answered a lot of the emails that I've sent. I have different reasons and rationales for, what causes the ongoing odor that, having owned a home here, the Outlaws have owned a home here since '81. This past year has been the worst. So, but my specific question though, we can definitely talk about all the other components of this later. I am talking about specific capture and treat technologies, like where you're talking about the covers that they put over the water, those big long strings of water that you have that are treating, going through treatment. Are those covered, or do you practice any of those types of technologies?
Councilwoman Valdivia, thank you for the question. And I know we're over time, but but if I can go back just a little bit in time, back in the 70s when I first started, those basins and tanks were not covered. And this has kind of evolved over the years. We then in the early 80s covered the majority of our basins and our tanks. And then we put a air system in that would take the air out from underneath the covers. And we ran them through a different type of filter than we have right now. So currently, though, we have the majority of our basins and tanks are covered, with the exception of our secondary aeration basin, which normally you do not cover a secondary aeration basin because it's an aerobic type of system and doesn't normally cause odor issues. So yes, we have covers. We have a ventilation system that takes the air out, and we now have what's called a biofilter. A biofilter then is a system that's placed underground, and then the air then that we've taken from underneath the tanks, come out from the tanks, and we run it through that biosystem, and there's a media there, and it's a biological process, and it takes and attacks the sulfides and the odor. So I hope that's answered your question. That's it.
It does, and definitely I understand it has to be a shorter answer right now, and I'm hoping that we can set up another meeting soon. One of the emails that I had received had said, we're not getting any calls from Oakland, or we're not getting any emails from Oakland, and I would have to counter that with, in the numerous emails I've sent, and I understand this is a shifting, moving, fluid process that that utilities goes through. But I would beg to differ that there's not complaints here. Complaints that I have sent in to utilities, people that have been feeling ill because of the smell, and they may be more prone to sensitivities with odors, and I get that. But I would just say for anybody that wants to know about the series of feedback that is coming in, not to the city, they just have to look on the Oakland Facebook page. There was one initial comment about the smell being particularly strong that day, and there were over 60 comments about the ongoing smell and the different types of odors in Oakland. So I don't want to belabor that point. I just wanted to bring it up, and we'll have to meet about that later. I did want to ask specifically about the biogas project. this pipeline that is being built for natural gas to go from Oakland to Soldier Creek to under Highway 24. I was wondering, when is the completion date set for that? And were there public hearings or public meetings that were had when before that project started?
So, Christina, this is Braxton. I'll take that one. We're currently planned for completion in June of 2021 of this year. This item has come up before the governing body numerous times. The biogas project as part of the CIP has been discussed and was approved by the governing body. I know that there have been some questions about the safety. Let me just point out that I have 890 miles of water line going through the city to be able to provide water to all the customers. My guess is that Kansas Gas Service has well over that in terms of gas lines running through the city that are connected to all of the residences. I do not believe that this poses a hazard to have a 3-inch gas line going from the Oakland treatment plant 2 miles to get to the Southern Star. In fact, that transmission main is probably less of a public hazard and nuisance than the 1,000 miles of gas line that is woven through the city of Topeka to provide gas to all of the customers.
Okay, so let me ask you then, the lines that you talk about that Kansas Gas Service has, those are the exact same type of line that what y'all are creating right now, correct? That will be done in June.
They're very similar. The line we're doing is a steel line. The Kansas Gas lines are steel. They're also plastic lines. Our line is going to be a 3-inch line. The Kansas Gas lines range in diameter from an inch up to 12 inches.
And the type of movement of the materials, the gas in comparison to Kansas Gas versus this gas that's going to be, or the materials to make the gas being pumped out of Oakland in this 2-mile run, are similar?
Yeah, very similar.
Okay. And was there any risk assessment study done on this project?
No, but I don't believe that a risk assessment was warranted. For the same reason that Kansas Gas Service wouldn't do a risk assessment to run a new gas line down a block to be able to replace an existing gas line.
Yes or no question. Thank you. That's it for now.
All right. Thanks for those questions. I'm assuming that City Manager, you'll follow up with Councilwoman on any additional questions that need to be answered and perhaps set up a meeting for that. Anything else that needs to come before this committee, we'll be happy to talk about it next month. I think let's go ahead and set the meeting for next month. Looks like I'm going to pull my calendar up here. We're going to be in February. What does the 3rd or 4th Monday look like for the committee? 15th, looks like the 15th or 22nd of February. Maybe we look at the 15th just to kind of keep it on the 3rd Monday schedule. 2 o'clock works still, 2 o'clock Monday on the 15th. All right.
Yep, that works.
Yes, Councilman Emerson.
Sorry, Chair. I was just saying, yeah, that works for me. I'm actually out of town on the 22nd, so the 15th works great.
Okay. Liz, assume you've got that and we'll get the appropriate notices out.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Did we have any public comment today? Liz?
I believe Mr. Joe Ledbetter was the only other person that had